They built 96 homes and didn't realize they were building them on my land. It started on a foggy Thursday morning. I was at my desk, halfway through a coffee that had already gone cold, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Something told me to answer. "You need to come down here now." The voice on the line was sharp, urgent, unmistakably familiar. "They're building houses. On your land." It was Mrs. Whitaker, my grandfather's neighbor for over 40 years. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. "Excuse me?" I said, still trying to process. "The eastern pasture," she hissed. "It's crawling with bulldozers and construction crews. They started pouring foundations yesterday." I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee. There had to be some mistake. That land had belonged to my grandfather for generations. When he passed, it was left to me. I hadn't been back since the service, and with my job keeping me tied to the city, I hadn't had the chance to check in on it. Still, no way anything legal was happening out there without my knowledge. "Are you sure it's the East Field?" I asked. "I'm standing on my porch right now, watching them dig holes where your granddad used to plant sunflowers," she snapped. "And there's a sign out front, Sunny Pines East, luxury homes coming soon." The next few hours were a blur. I grabbed the emergency duffel from under my bed, stuffed it with whatever clothes I could find, and hit the road. A 5-hour drive turned into 3.5. I barely blinked the whole way. I couldn't shake the image of that sign Mrs. Whitaker mentioned, standing in the soil that had fed 4 generations of my family. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Grandpa never talked about selling. In fact, he used to say, "When I go, this land stays in the family. They'll have to bury me in it before I sign it away." And he meant it. By the time I pulled onto the gravel path leading to the farmhouse, the air smelled different. It wasn't the scent of wet earth or cracked hay like it used to be. It was diesel fumes and kicked up dust. As I crested the hill and looked out across the eastern fields, my heart plummeted. The golden grass was gone, replaced by rows of orange flags, muddy tire tracks, and the deafening growl of machinery. Bulldozers sliced through the earth like it was butter. Workers in neon vests moved like ants across the landscape, marking territory that didn't belong to them. And then I saw it. A towering billboard, gleaming like a trophy. Sunny Pines East, 96 luxury homes, starting at $495,000. It stood tall, proud, shamelessly planted in land that was still legally mine. I slammed the car door behind me and stormed toward the only person in sight who wasn't covered in mud, a woman in a spotless white blouse, holding a clipboard like it was a sword. Her hair was stiff with product, not a speck of dirt on her shoes. She was completely out of place and yet clearly in charge. "I'm going to need you to explain what's happening here," I said, not even bothering to hide the edge in my voice. She glanced at me like I was a pizza delivery driver who had rung the wrong bell. "Excuse me," she said. "Who are you?" "I'm the owner of this property," I said. "My grandfather owned this land. Joe Richards. He passed last year. It was left to me." Her lips curled into something that might have once been a smile, but now just looked smug. "Ah, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Diane Reynolds, president of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association. This parcel was purchased from the Richards estate last year. We have the deed, permits, and county approvals. Everything's above board." "No," I said flatly. "That's impossible. My grandfather never sold. He told me himself. He promised." She offered a rehearsed look of sympathy. "Perhaps he didn't mention it to you. It happens more than you'd think." I stared at her. My blood boiled. "Show me the paperwork." "You're welcome to contact our legal office," she said, plucking a business card from her clipboard and handing it to me like a consolation prize. "But construction is well underway. If you'll excuse me." She turned, already dialing her phone, her attention shifting back to the workers like I didn't exist. I stood there, watching the machines desecrate what was left of my family's legacy. Grandpa's east pasture, gone. Replaced by trenches, pipes, surveyor stakes, and promises of luxury living. I needed answers. Now, by the time I got back to the farmhouse, the sun was dipping low behind the trees, and Mrs. Whitaker was already on the porch, waiting. "I knew you'd come," she said, handing me a glass of iced tea like she had since I was a kid. "He said this would happen." "What do you mean?" "Your grandpa. He was suspicious when the HOA folks started sniffing around a few years ago. Said they were crooks in cardigans. Kept talking about protecting the land. He spent weeks in his office, digging through old maps and papers. Said he was trying to find proof." "Proof of what?" I asked. "That the land was bigger than what the county thought. That someone had changed the records." My heart raced. "Did he find anything?" She hesitated. "I don't know. The last time I saw him before he went to the hospital, he said, 'I've hidden everything in the one place they won't look.'" Then he winked. I didn't sleep that night. The farmhouse office was just as he'd left it, stale with pipe smoke, papers stacked neatly in labelled folders, shelves lined with dusty almanacs and decades of ledgers. It was like time had stopped. I started with the obvious: file cabinets, desk drawers, even behind the old paintings. Nothing jumped out. Hours passed. I was down to my last bit of hope when I noticed a slight creak under the desk. A single floorboard flexed beneath my foot. I grabbed a letter opener and wedged it into the gap, prying the board loose. Underneath was a narrow space with a small, rusted metal box. The key, because of course Grandpa left a key, hung from a nail taped to the underside of the desk. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside were things that should never have been hidden. The original deed to the land, property surveys dating back to 1922, a letter addressed to me, and a map, a real one. Inked by hand, aged and brittle, it showed our land stretching almost 90 acres further than what the county records claimed today. And the letter, Grandpa's handwriting was unmistakable. "If you're reading this, someone's trying to steal what's ours. The records have been tampered with. Compare this map to the county's. You'll see what they took. I never signed anything. I made sure of it. But if they ever try to build, they'll walk right into the truth, right into the trap." I leaned back in the old desk chair, everything crashing down at once. Diane Reynolds and her HOA weren't just trespassing. They were building on land that was never theirs. And what they didn't know? They'd just walked into Grandpa's trap. And now I was the one holding the key. The next morning, I showed up at the only law office in town before they even flipped the sign to open. The receptionist gave me a skeptical look until I dropped the metal box on the counter and told her I needed to speak with someone immediately, preferably someone who specialized in land disputes. That got her attention. An hour later, I sat across from Walter Hayes, a silver-haired attorney whose office smelled like leather-bound books and pipe smoke, like he and my grandfather might have gotten along just fine. I laid out everything: Grandpa's death, the sudden development, Diane Reynolds, the survey discrepancies, the letter in the box. He didn't interrupt once, just leaned back in his creaky chair, fingers steepled under his chin, as I unspooled the story. When I finished, he slowly opened the box and pulled out the map. He spent a long time tracing the lines with a ruler, comparing the original survey from 1922 with a current satellite printout from the county website. His brow furrowed deeper with each inch. "Well," he finally said, placing the ruler down gently, "this is what we call a problem." I leaned forward. "You mean for them?" He nodded. If these old surveys are legitimate, and from what I can see they are, they show a clear boundary discrepancy, and not a small one. You're looking at nearly 80 acres of land that were recorded as part of the Sunny Pines development, but were never legally transferred. I let that sink in. Diane's luxury homes, their clubhouse, the community pool, all of it built on land that was still in my family's name, or should have been. The bad news, Walter continued, is that proving fraud isn't easy, especially when decades have passed. County records don't just change themselves. Someone submitted an updated plat back in '97. We'd need to see who signed off on that. I pulled up a photo of the altered deed from the county's website. He zoomed in on the signature. That's supposed to be your grandfather's signature? He was in the hospital that entire month. Triple bypass. There's no way he signed anything. Walter raised an eyebrow. Then that's forgery. He stood up, crossed the room to a bookshelf, and pulled out a binder as thick as a dictionary. We can file for an emergency injunction to halt construction, he said. Buy ourselves time while we build a case. But Diane's already got permits, right? From the county. He nodded grimly. Which means she has connections. People who helped push this through fast. People who won't like us poking around. I didn't care. Let them squirm. Walter spent the next hour preparing the injunction paperwork, contacting a judge, and scheduling a hearing for the following week. Meanwhile, I made my way to the county records office. What I needed wasn't just a single piece of proof. I needed a pattern. Something that showed this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a strategy. I sat in the records room for 6 straight hours, combing through property transfers, plat adjustments, easement filings. Something didn't sit right. Every document connected to the Sunny Pines expansion included one of the same 6 names. Diane Reynolds, Thomas Reynolds, her husband, James Calhoun, the county commissioner. A few others I didn't recognize, but all appearing on the same filings again and again, like the entire approval chain had been carefully stacked with friends. Then I found something even more disturbing. 3 months earlier, a $16 million construction loan had been approved using Sunny Pines East as collateral. Only they didn't technically own that land. It was mine, which meant the loan was fraudulent. I took photos of everything and got out of there before anyone could start asking questions. Back at the farmhouse, Mrs. Whitaker was already waiting with a fresh glass of lemonade and a stack of complaints she'd collected from neighbors. The longer I listened, the more I realized this wasn't just about my land anymore. Diane Reynolds and her HOA weren't just overstepping, they were actively driving people out. I learned about a man named Mr. Langley, who had been fined for installing a wheelchair ramp. About the Johnsons, who had to remove their front porch swing because it violated sightline aesthetics. An elderly couple had been fined over $1,200 in a single year for their unauthorized mailbox color. Dozens of families, most of them older or alone, had sold under pressure. Always below market value, always to the same LLCs. It was a coordinated campaign of harassment, disguised as rule enforcement. By the time the sun went down, my inbox was filling with emails from neighbors who'd heard what I was uncovering. HOA members, residents, former homeowners. They were angry. They were scared. But more than anything, they were ready to talk. Then came the message that changed everything. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I have information. HOA finances. Diane's not what she seems. Can we meet? I typed back a single word. Where? 10 minutes later, I opened the door to find Gerald Monroe standing on my porch. Balding, glasses, polite to a fault. Treasurer of the Sunny Pines HOA. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside. I shouldn't be here, he muttered. If she finds out I talked to you. She? Diane. She controls everything. I do the books, but she reviews every number before it goes public. You want to know where the dues go? You won't find it in the official records." He handed me a USB stick. "What's on it?" 7 years of financials, real ones. I kept backups. Every time something felt off, I saved a copy before she could adjust it. We sat at the kitchen table for hours as he explained what he'd seen. Unapproved withdrawals, HOA fees funneled into companies owned by Diane's family, fake vendors billing for landscaping services that were never performed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moved quietly, month after month. "She's got people everywhere," he said. "Lawyers, building inspectors, the planning board. But she never expected someone like you to show up." I looked at him. "Why help me?" He sighed. "Because it's wrong. And because I think she's finally gone too far." Before he left, I asked if anyone else on the board might flip. "Maybe," he said, "but you didn't hear that from me." He slipped out the back door into the night. I stared at the screen, at the rows and rows of transactions, at the evidence. I had enough to burn Sunny Pines to the ground. But the truth was, I didn't want to burn anything. I wanted to take it back, strip it down to the studs, rebuild it the way it should have been, the way Grandpa would have done. Diane thought she had the system rigged, the game won, the pieces all in her favor. She had no idea that the board had shifted. And the trap she'd been walking into? She'd just helped me finish building it. I didn't sleep that night. The farmhouse creaked and groaned around me like it was trying to whisper advice from another time. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, old maps, scanned emails, and the flickering glow of my laptop. I wasn't just sitting on a legal technicality anymore. I was sitting on a powder keg, and Diane had handed me the match. But I knew something now that I hadn't known a few days ago. I wasn't alone. People were fed up. Not just with the fake property lines, not just with the construction, but with her, with all of it. The arbitrary fines, the harassment, the total control she had over everything from what color you could paint your door to whether your kid could have a swing set in the yard. This wasn't a homeowners association, it was a dictatorship. I knew I needed to act fast. If I waited for courts to work things out, it'd be too late. The homes would be built, the lies would become reality, and the truth would get buried, literally, under concrete foundations. I needed to strike now publicly in front of her, her allies, and everyone she thought she controlled. So I printed 200 flyers and walked through every street in Sunny Pines that morning, slipping them into mailboxes, taping them to light poles, handing them directly to the people Diane thought were too scared to speak. On each flyer was a bold headline: "Emergency Community Meeting Tonight. Your home may be at risk." I listed the time, the place, the Sunny Pines Community Center, and attached copies of the original survey showing the property lines. My name was at the bottom, followed by one line: "Come see the truth for yourself." By evening, the parking lot was overflowing. Cars lined the curb all the way down the street. People were spilling into the building, murmuring, gripping flyers, eyes filled with curiosity, worry, and a quiet, rising hope. They hadn't been invited. They'd been summoned. Inside, folding chairs had been set up in haphazard rows, everyone filled. Others stood in the back, arms crossed, whispering to each other. I took a deep breath and walked in. Gerald, the treasurer, gave me a subtle nod from near the front. I didn't see Diane at first, but I knew she was coming. And then she appeared. Late, of course, always making an entrance. She pushed her way through the crowd in a bright red blazer, perfectly tailored, like she was stepping onto a stage she assumed belonged to her. She gave me a glance that could have cut glass. "Excuse me," she said loudly. "This is an unauthorized gathering. The community center is for HOA-approved functions only." "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady, According to the original land survey from 1922, this building sits on my land. A ripple of gasps and murmurs moved through the room. She blinked, then smiled. That's ridiculous. I walked to the front of the room and held up a document, high enough for everyone to see. This, I said, is my grandfather's original property survey. You'll notice that the boundary lines extend nearly 80 acres beyond what's currently on county record. Those records were changed in 1997, based on a forged signature. My grandfather never sold an inch of this land. People shifted in their chairs. Several leaned forward, squinting at the documents I began handing out. Copies of the survey, the deed, side-by-side comparisons. I kept going. What this means is simple. Not only is Sunny Pines East being built illegally, but parts of the existing development, including the clubhouse, 20 homes, and yes, this very room, sit on property that still legally belongs to my family. That set off a tidal wave of voices. Someone in the back shouted, "What do you mean my house might not be on my land?" Another asked, "Can they take our homes?" Diane stormed to the front, red-faced. "This is nonsense. We've had county approval for years. We followed every legal step." "Based on fraudulent documentation," I said calmly. "I've already filed an injunction. Construction has been halted by court order." The room exploded. People turned to each other in disbelief. One man stood up and shouted, "Are you saying we might lose our property?" I raised my hands. No one's here to take homes away, but the truth is, the HOA has been operating on stolen land. And while we're on the topic, maybe we should talk about where your dues are going. I nodded to Gerald, who stepped forward nervously and pulled out a thick packet. "I've served as treasurer for 7 years," he said. "I kept records, real ones. Diane has been funneling HOA funds into businesses owned by her family. Landscaping contracts, security firms, consulting companies, tens of thousands of dollars disappearing every year." Diane's mouth opened, then closed. Her face went white. "You're lying," she said, barely above a whisper. "I have emails," Gerald replied, holding up the printouts. "Invoices, wire transfers. If anyone wants to see them, I brought copies." Silence swept over the crowd. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "What else have you been hiding, Diane?" Another chimed in, "I got fined for painting my door navy blue." "Navy blue." "That's where our fees go," someone shouted. "Into Diane's pockets." She snapped. "This is all slander. You'll be hearing from my attorney." I stepped closer. "You think this is about lawyers? About money? Number, this is about the truth. You didn't just cross the line. You built an entire neighborhood past it. You harassed people, fined them, bullied them, all while building on land that never belonged to you. And now you want to pretend like you're the victim." She turned to the crowd, looking for support, but found only blank stares and skeptical frowns. Then I dropped the final card. "According to these surveys," I said, holding up one last paper, "Diane Reynolds' personal residence, the one with the tennis court and the 6-car garage, sits entirely on land that she does not own." The silence was deafening. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I let the moment hang. "I'm not here to destroy homes," I said. "I'm here to rebuild trust. But that starts with accountability, with facts, with documents that were buried for decades. This isn't just my fight. It's ours." Someone stood up and started clapping, then another. Soon the entire room was on their feet. Diane stood frozen at the front, hands trembling, eyes darting around like she was looking for an escape hatch that didn't exist. As people filed out, talking amongst themselves, a young woman stopped next to me. She was maybe in her early 30s, nervous, holding a crumpled flyer in her hand. "I just bought a lot in the new development," she said quietly. Everything I had, I put into it. What happens now? I looked her in the eyes. We'll figure it out, I promise. You're not the enemy. Diane is. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and left. Diane tried to slink away quietly. As she passed me, she leaned in close and hissed, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I didn't even blink. Actually, I do. That's what scares you. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because at that point, every single person in that room had seen the truth for themselves. And the foundation Diane had spent years building. It was already cracking under her feet. The fallout from that meeting spread like wildfire. By the next morning, half the neighborhood had seen the documents. Word traveled fast, faster than even Diane expected. Rumors turned into facts as more people came forward. Homeowners were comparing fines, digging through their HOA letters, checking their own deeds. The tension that had simmered under the surface for years finally boiled over. The illusion of control Diane had so carefully crafted. It was unraveling, and she knew it. But she wasn't the type to go down quietly. The very next day, I got a knock on my door just after sunrise. When I opened it, I was greeted by a man in a tailored grey suit, holding a thick envelope. His expression was blank, but his words were anything but. "Cease and desist," he said flatly. "You're ordered to immediately withdraw all claims regarding Sunny Pines development or face legal action for slander, interference, and fraud." I opened the envelope before he even left. The paperwork inside was laughable. They accused me of forging documents, me, and claimed the original surveys were fabricated with malicious intent. They said I had damaged the HOA's reputation and caused widespread emotional distress in the community. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. It didn't stop there. When I tried to leave the property an hour later, I found giant concrete blocks had been placed across my driveway overnight. HOA security trucks idled just beyond them, watching. I walked down to confront one of the guards, who shrugged and told me, "This access point has been closed for safety reasons. Development zone." "This is my land," I snapped. "I have every right to come and go." He didn't even look at me when he said, "Take it up with the committee." The county sheriff's office refused to intervene. "Civil matter," they said. "Let the courts handle it." Meanwhile, Diane was using every tool she had to shut me down, to isolate me, to make my life as miserable as possible. Within 24 hours, the farmhouse received a dozen new code violations: faulty wiring, non-compliant plumbing, porch railings that were suddenly too low. My water pressure dropped to a trickle. Then the power cut out. I called the utility company, maintenance, they said. No estimate on when service would be restored. I tried ordering takeout. The delivery driver called, confused. "They told me your address doesn't exist." I wasn't just being attacked legally. I was being cut off, bit by bit. She was trying to make me break. But the truth? It just made me more determined. Late that night, I sat in the dark farmhouse, lit only by a flashlight and a battery-powered lantern. The silence felt thick. Outside, the bulldozers sat motionless, waiting for the court to give them the green light again. Inside, I sifted through one of Grandpa's old file cabinets, looking for anything else I'd missed. That's when I found it. A faded manila folder labeled East Ridge Environmental. Inside were handwritten notes, old newspaper clippings, and letters addressed to local officials. It was Grandpa's documentation from nearly 30 years ago, back when another group of developers tried to do exactly what Diane was doing now. He had fought them too, and he'd won. His notes detailed a fragile wetland zone buried beneath what Sunny Pines now called Phase 2. The area Diane was planning to pave over was home to protected species. That land wasn't just legally disputed, it was environmentally protected. The next morning, I sent it all to Mr. Hayes, my attorney, and requested a formal environmental impact survey. He said he'd get it rushed. If the results came back the way we expected, Diane wouldn't just be in trouble with the county, she'd be in violation of federal law. And still, she pressed forward. She filed a countersuit, claiming I had illegally weaponized obsolete property records to sabotage a lawful development. She requested a restraining order to keep me from the construction site. She even tried to push for immediate resumption of the build, arguing I posed a threat to economic progress. Her lawyers were high-powered and aggressive, but the documents didn't lie. The deed, the surveys, the map, the environmental notes, together they told a story that no amount of money could bury. While the lawyers fought in court, I turned to the people. Mrs. Whitaker helped me reach out to more neighbours. We organised informal meetups on porches, in garages, in backyards. Everyone had a story about Diane, about being fined for planting the wrong flowers, for installing a privacy fence, for having their grandkids' toys in the yard. The control had been so complete, no one had dared resist. Until now. We formed a coalition, a new association, the Meadow Creek Community Alliance, not bound by fear, not driven by greed, but built on fairness, transparency, and actual community. We had over 80 families join within the first week. Gerald agreed to serve as our interim treasurer. We drafted a charter, voted on new rules, shared financials publicly. For the first time in years, people were actually smiling at each other on the sidewalks. Diane, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her inner circle was shrinking. More board members resigned quietly. One of them anonymously delivered HOA financial statements to my lawyer, records we hadn't even asked for. Her own supporters were abandoning ship. Then the environmental survey came back. Wetlands, endangered species, protected land, federal red tape. Diane's so-called Phase 2 development wasn't just illegal, it was radioactive. And that's when the police came knocking. 3 black and whites pulled up in front of the farmhouse one morning. At first, I thought she'd managed to pull one last trick, have me arrested on some trumped-up charge. But when the officers stepped aside, there she was, Diane Reynolds, still in her red blazer, still trying to wear that old mask of control. But now, her hair was frayed at the edges, her smile cracked, her heels sunk into the soft ground outside as she tried to talk her way out of what was coming. "Ms. Reynolds," one of the officers said, "we need you to come with us." "For what?" she snapped. The officer opened a folder. "Financial misconduct, fraud, misappropriation of community funds. We have warrants for the HOA's records and statements from multiple witnesses." She protested the whole way to the cruiser, threatened lawsuits, claimed political connections. But no one was listening anymore, because the truth had won. 3 months later, Sunny Pines was no longer the same place. The construction equipment had been hauled away. Phase 2 was scrapped. That land had been formally designated as a protected conservation area, thanks to Grandpa's notes and our coalition's petition. As for the existing homes, we worked with a real estate attorney in the county to formalize new deeds. Every family whose home sat on what was once disputed land received legal ownership, at no cost. No one lost their home. No one got kicked out. They finally got what they were promised, without the lies. The Meadow Creek Community Alliance became the new standard. Doors that were once beige by mandate were now red, blue, yellow, any color a homeowner wanted. Front gardens bloomed with tomatoes, herbs, wildflowers. A small community garden was built on a formerly unauthorized lot. Kids played on swings without permission slips. People started saying hello to each other again. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Whitaker, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with that golden hue only this land seemed to know how to produce. "He'd be proud," she said. nodding toward the fields. I smiled. He set the trap, I said. All I did was spring it. She laughed, handing me a glass of lemonade. That's the thing about real legacies, she said. They don't vanish. They wait. And when the right hands pick them up again, they bloom. And there, in the distance, the once threatened wetlands shimmered under the evening light, untouched, alive, thriving. The homes still stood. The people still lived. The community wasn't destroyed. It had finally been claimed by the ones who truly belonged.